Welcome to our talk today. We're going to learn about wasting time in the office. I'd like to thank the Nebraska ASQ section, the Minneapolis ASQ section, and the Quality Management and Lean Enterprise divisions of ASQ for their help. My name is Doug Wood, and this talk has been presented to each of these groups, and we're interested in sharing it with you via this video. We have 3 learning objectives, and our agenda covers 4 points. First, we'd like everyone to understand that trying to fit office lean into an industrial lean paradigm is not a good idea. There are a number of people who say, yeah, we've done lean in the factory, so let's just apply lean in the office now. No. That's not how lean was developed for the factory, and that's not how lean should be done in the office. If you try to do that, you're going to run into confusion. Secondly, lean does not talk about cost. Lean measures time and flow, but if you're not measuring the cost, you're not being strategic. No organization does strategic planning without talking about dollars. Dollars and cents are at the core of it. Even a hospital will not build a new wing just to have nicer rooms. They will build a new wing for the hospital because there's a dollar and cents value to the hospital. So if you're not measuring dollars, you're not being strategic. This is one reason why often our efforts to improve our office environment don't work well, because we don't know what the dollar cost represented by the waste is. Third, you can use survey data to determine this cost of waste in your office environment. You don't have to use a stopwatch to measure everybody and what they're doing. See, the point of this measure is not to be accurate to the nearest penny, but to provide an approximate value for guiding decisions. So those are our 3 learning objectives. You have to use an office paradigm to effectively apply lean in the office. You have to measure the dollar costs. And you can do it with a survey. More about the survey at the end of the talk. Let's go into our agenda now. We're going to talk about how the workforce of America is changing. Then we're going to talk about some theoretical models. As W. Edward Deming said, if you don't have a theory, you don't have anything. The third item on our agenda is to measure the cost of office waste. We will see data from surveys to identify what the cost of office waste is, and it would not be fair, of course, if we finished this talk and didn't give you some tools and techniques for improvement. We think of America as a factory-driven society, but is that really true? Well, it is not really that way anymore. Here is data from the U.S. Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics, using 1997 and 2011 data as 2 data points. So this slide looks at the job count data in 4 broad categories by taking job titles and classifying them into these 4 categories. So our categories are factories, farming, office, and service. And we compared these at the 2 points in time to see what's happened to the labor force in the U.S. There are some surprises here. One thing that's not a surprise is that the factory jobs, manufacturing, assembly, work like that, has declined significantly. We had more than 40 million factory jobs in 1997, and in 2011 we fell below 30 million. Now that's a sizable drop. Again, some of these jobs went to other countries, but we're not looking at that right now. What's clear is that we've reduced the number of factory jobs. Now, did those jobs become service jobs in retail or flipping burgers? We hear that all the time. But if you look at the data, it does not appear that way. Instead, we've added more office jobs than we've lost factory jobs. Retail and restaurants and other service jobs have remained flat. Office work includes anyone who works in an office environment. Now, that might be insurance or processing medical paperwork or investment management or logistics or software development or sales. Okay, any job title where the worker is typically in an office environment. It's not generally recognized that we've added more office jobs than we have lost factory jobs. Now focus on the red bars under factory and office, and you'll see that in 2011 there are more than twice as many jobs in the office as there are in factories. Well, this argues that we should be looking at office efficiency more than looking at factory efficiency. Moving on to the theoretical models, let's take a look at how waste gets classified. Most lean practitioners use the Japanese word for waste, muda. And these are the 7 categories that are more often applied. Now these 7 categories come from factory observations. Transportation, moving from one workstation or building to another. Inventory. Motion. Motion refers to activities at a work area, at a workstation. Waiting refers to the products waiting for processing. Overproduction is making more than you need. Overprocessing is spending more effort than you should. Defects refer to something that goes wrong, things not done right the first time. Now these terms came from Taiichi Ohno at Toyota. Now the Japanese word for where the real work happens is gemba, or genda, depending on how you pronounce it. In his own words, Taiichi Ohno went to gemba and watched and observed these categories of waste. It's widely accepted that these are the categories of waste in most factories. In the book The Lean Toolbox by Virchno and Holwig, the authors attempted early on to translate these categories of waste into a framework for office work. They came up with these categories: delays for customers, duplicate effort, unnecessary movement, unclear communication, incorrect inventory, poor customer service, and errors or defects and damage. Now this sounds a little better, but I still have a little trouble with incorrect inventories. What is inventory in an office? Is it paperwork? How about counting the pencils in your drawer? Can you picture what inventory is in your office? Does it look like factory inventory? I don't think inventories are a significant aspect of office work. William Leroux, in his book Office Kaizen 2 from ASQ Quality Press, did a good job of coming up with 4 broad categories: people, process, information, and assets. Next, he broke this down into 19 waste categories. I think this is a marvelous effort, and Mr. Leroux should be congratulated. However, having 19 wastes seems a little bit too complicated to apply effectively. Measuring so many wastes seems to be a difficult task. So Taiichi Ohno was asked to write down his 7 wastes, but he objected to that. He said, No, you need to go to Gemba and see for yourself. So let's do that. What is office work? Most of you probably work in an office. What does it look like to you? Well, for me and others who've contributed to this project, it's meetings. Whether group meetings or one-on-one meetings. It's phone calls, handling emails, making decisions, searching for data. Who hasn't done that? And analyzing that data. It's also filling out forms, reporting on information, managing projects, and doing follow-up work. We create action lists and we work them. We make plans and we do change planning to help our future execution. Now that sounds to me like office work. But what are the waste categories in office work? Okay, you all know these. It just grates on us when we go to meetings and there's no good outcome. It's a waste, right? And then there's distractions. You're pulled away to do something else. Offices live on distractions. There's no end to distractions in offices, where there are all different kinds of distractions as well. Have you ever been distracted by something, and while you were distracted, an idea came to your head with a solution to a problem that you were working on previously? Now, that was a good distraction. You can't just look at distractions as one single category, because there's good and bad. Some people consciously step outside their office. They take a walk outdoors and they think about solutions to problems. Now, it can be conscious thought or subconscious thought. You could call that a distraction, but it's a good distraction. Then there's messaging. That's emails, phone calls, text messages. Those are the three that seem to be the most common today, and there will be more in the future. I don't think Twitter is used very often in office environments, at least not yet. And someone may come up with yet another technique for messaging. All of this messaging eats an enormous amount of our time. There are arrangements. Now, that word's a little funky because there's two kinds. There's physical arrangement of space, and that can be wasteful. But probably more important to our office work is the virtual organization. That's shared drives, or SharePoint, or whatever you use for your document storage and retrieval. These are all part of your virtual organization. And these virtual organizations, although they're invisible, can be extremely wasteful. And then there's health issues. Being sick, back pain, making appointments for doctors, seeing doctors. Now, not all health issues show up in time off of work. There's also motivation. That's when workers just don't care. This is where people get online and then they wander off and start looking things up. They're spending time on Facebook or other distractions. More than distractions. These are caused when people simply don't care about their job. Now, that's a motivation issue. People don't care to work. But you can always blame the workers, right? I don't think there's a single book that recommends blaming the workers. Finally, we have poor results and workflow problems, bad decisions, or the work does not flow well, or you have to do it all over again. That would be poor results. Now that we have our major categories of waste, how can we go about measuring them? So in 2014, I sent out 614 emails to individuals I've known for years, and these people were selected at random. They were not categorized or selected in any with any methodology. All the responses were optional and anonymous. So I got 74 valid responses over 39 days. This is a pretty broad spectrum of people working in all different industries. And with 74 responses, you can definitely see a pattern. So what were the questions? Well, first of all, considering meetings you have attended in the past month, how many meeting hours per week would you consider a wasted time as wasted time for you? We used a 10-point scale on the survey, using fractional hours up to whole hours, so that people could pick somewhere on that range. We also asked about the physical arrangement of space, or shared file areas, where you waste time searching. We asked about health issues. Again, it was anonymous. We were not trying to get anyone in trouble. We asked about the lack of personal motivation. All of these questions were asked from the point of view of the individual person. We were not asking people to extrapolate for their entire organization, but just to speak for themselves, just in their own eyes. Then we asked about distractions. We asked both questions. How many hours per week have you spent in activities not related to your regular assigned work? Well, that would be a distraction. And then, have you had the experience of pulling away and getting an answer? And we subtracted the two. So we were only looking at distractions that were not a help to your productivity. For messaging and searching, we asked how much unproductive time per week have you spent on emails, phone calls, and texting. And for workflow and results, we said, to what extent have the poor results or decisions and or poor workflows created wasted time on your part? Now, most lean enterprise and transactional approaches begin and end with workflow. Well, I think that's because it's the one thing in the office you could look at and say, hey, that looks like a factory. I'm not sure if that's a majority of the waste. So we'll see that in a moment when we look at results. We also asked some demographic questions. What fraction of your time is spent in an office environment? Because some people split their time between office and factory. I asked for annual income in 10 different categories. So this allows us to put a dollar value on wasted time. And it's also the reason why the survey is done from the point of view of one person and anonymously. While it's possible that some people may have lied about their income, well, why would they lie? What's the point? What's the advantage? We also asked about industry type, the level of hierarchy they worked at, and the organization size. So what did we find from our survey? The average dollar waste per person per year was $31,800. And yes, poor results was the single highest category. Messaging waste and distractions were not far behind. Loss of motivation was still more than half the size of the poor work results. Does this surprise you? So how many people are in your office? If you have 10 people in your office, $318,000 per year. 100 people in your office, $3.1 million a year. Would you like to recover some of that? So again, the dollars speak loudly. Remember, in the factory, we have cost accounting systems which tell us where the dollars are. In the office, not so much. So, if we break down the distributions of dollar annual cost per person by category, we can compare them. So this slide shows a series of box plots. A box plot spreads out the distribution of answers from our data from low to high. The little asterisks here show outliers or extreme values. These are answers that stick out and away from the bulk of all the answers in that category. The bulk of all the answers in each category is summarized by these gray boxes. The bottom of the gray box is the 25th percentile, and the top of the gray box is the 75th percentile. That little black line inside the gray box, that's the median value. This does show that the results and messaging and distraction and motivation were somewhat higher. But we have a better picture that shows the differences between these categories. In a Pareto chart, we organize our bars in descending order, showing what fraction of the total each bar represents. Pareto charts are good to show the vital few compared to the less significant many. Some call this the 80-20 rule, but not all data fits this rule. In our case, we have to get to the fourth bar out of 7 before we've reached 80% of the total responses. You can see here that workflow, distractions, messaging, and motivation are quite a bit higher than the other categories. What happens at higher levels of the organization? So we broke this down by our 3 categories: an executive, non-supervisory, and middle manager. So these are broad enough categories that works for most organizations. It's notable that executives lose a higher fraction of their salary in waste. But that kind of makes sense. Where do you do most of your control? Where's the most of the control mechanisms? Well, it's on the non-supervisory personnel. It's also interesting to see that middle managers had a much broader range of waste as well. They had both higher values as well as lower values than executives. Breaking it down by organization size, we have the 2 categories. Large was 500 employees and higher. Small to medium was under 500. Now, There is not really much difference between these two categories. You would expect that large organizations might have more waste. That does not appear to be the case. If we break down our costs for these large or small to medium with our bar chart in each category, we see that there isn't a big difference. See, I'm going to toggle back and forth between large organizations and small to medium organizations. Let's go back large to small to medium. You'll notice that there really is very little difference. Again, that was surprising. We kind of expected large organizations to have waste in different categories, but they did not. Perhaps this argues that waste in offices comes from a different basis than the sheer size of the organization. Another thing we did was correlate each category versus other ones. So when we look at the dollar waste in distraction, it correlated fairly closely with dollar waste in meetings. Of course, this does not show cause and effect. It simply means that these two categories change together, and maybe something is driving both of them. On this slide, the boxes where the white numbers are on a gray background are where the correlation was higher than 0.47. Remember, correlation goes from 0 to 1. That is, 0 meaning no correlation, 1 being they both go up at the same time. If we look at this, we can see that there's a couple of areas where there's fairly close correlations. If the correlation was below 0.47, we consider the correlation to be negligible. So it's hard to see patterns here. So what we did was we created another chart out of this, showing the relationships between these correlations. So the bars between the ovals show the correlation of values between those two different categories. The wider bars show higher correlations. In other words, distraction costs are high in organizations that have a lot of meeting waste. Now, we don't know why this is happening, and it probably needs more study. We found a three-way relationship between information searching, messaging problems, and poor workflow. It was interesting that motivation and distraction are not correlated. You might expect that motivation would correlate closer with distraction. From all that we know about behavior, we would expect that high distraction and low motivation would be tied to what might be called low engagement. So what happens if we combine the costs for these two categories? According to both Forbes and Gallup, over 70% of American workers are disengaged. If we put these two together, we can see that engagement, which is the combination of motivation and distraction, is larger than the cost of waste and workflow. Did the size of that surprise you? So we'd like to welcome any questions or observations you have by email. Our email address is located at the end of this talk. Okay, what about working at home? So, there's some who feel working at home is more efficient. So we asked a question: how much time is spent working at home outside the normal office? And how productive do you feel there? Again, we were surprised. There was not a clear answer. If people answered 5, it meant that working at home was much more productive. If they answered 1, it meant that home productivity was much less than the office. And as you can see, these box plots do not necessarily, they tend to all align with each other. That would indicate that there's very little significant difference from one of these answers to another. Apparently, working at home is not a solution to waste in the office. Okay, so now we've looked at the dollar cost of office waste. Remember, $31,000 per person per year. How do we improve that? How do you deal with missing motivation? Well, first of all, each employee needs to know, why should I care? The leadership has to explain how this work connects to the real world. People want a reason to work beyond that of just paying their bills. Most people are not motivated when the boss says, do what I say. Secondly, you have to have the right measures. If you measure people on uncontrollable aspects of their work, it's going to be a problem. Okay? People will object to that. It is pointless to control somebody's work output when they don't control the inputs. Okay? So if you link your performance measures to things that individuals can control, now you've got a way to actually drive better behavior. If you're not measuring the quality of output as well as the quality of the input rather, as well as controls on the process, then your measurement can be a problem. Performance bonuses and recognition should be based on more than one item. Generally, this means a reward matrix. If it is well designed, then people may be motivated by it. But remember that people are not lab rats. Okay? And any performance recognition needs to be done with a high degree of sincerity. So there's a study from the 1920s at Western Electric's Hawthorne Assembly Plant in Cicero, Illinois. It showed that workers' productivity increased under both good conditions and poor conditions, as long as the individual needs of the workers were recognized and workers were treated with dignity. So how much does it cost to consider individuals' needs or treat people with dignity? You'd think that this would have been established by now. How can we avoid distraction waste? Well, if you work in a cubicle farm, those cubicles are designed to be flexible. They should be built to reduce distractions. You might need higher walls, or you might need to allow people some personal audio shields. Okay, that would be earbuds and MP3 players. More importantly, you have to find a culturally acceptable way to say, stay out. Perhaps it's a certain time of day when people are not to be disturbed. Perhaps it's a private corner where they can retreat when they need to concentrate. Sometimes working at home is where people work best, and if you have to study, getting away from the office so that you can do so without being pinged constantly might be very helpful. So, all right. How do we address poor results or poor workflow? The first thing you must do is to make sure that you're producing things a customer wants. No one should be efficiently producing items the customer does not want to see. So know what the customer needs and what that looks like to your business. The tool we call value stream mapping is how you find non-value added steps in your workflow. And there's almost always non-value added steps in every workflow. Third, there's a tool used in Six Sigma called SIPOC. It stands for Suppliers, Inputs, Process, Outputs, and Customers. It's kind of flowchart that looks at the inputs and outputs for each step. It also looks at who supplies the inputs and who receives the outputs. This tool can be used as a framework to create measures that apply to the actual inputs and controls of the process. How do we address messaging waste? Having common email rules and using common sense are two things we can do. Reply to all should not be done in email. It's a terrible idea. Don't send your email to people who don't need to know. How many of you have been on reply to all messes where it just keeps running back and forth? You know, the email list keeps getting bigger and bigger. This may create a legal issue as information gets sent to the wrong people. If you need back and forth dialogue, then go and speak to the person or call them. Use the right medium for the communication. There's a place for texting, there's a place for phone calls, and there's a place for email. Don't use a meeting to set up meetings. Don't use a text message when you need a broader explanation. And don't use a phone call to handle text information. Unsubscribe to spam. Turn it off when you don't need it. Another common problem is looking at emails too often. Now, this is partly cultural. If people expect you to reply to emails within minutes, then you're going to be forced to look at it constantly. Perhaps, text or a phone call would be better for a quick response. But only if this technique is accepted by everyone else. So this is common rules. Immediately work emails that you can do under 2 minutes. File other things to look at them later. So there needs to be a cultural understanding that you are not going to be watching your emails every minute and a half. If this is the expectation where you work, then you have a leadership issue with this messaging. Messaging is your servant. You are not the slave. 3 items on this slide will help you work out a better way to handle messages. It takes an element of leadership, of management, of planning and control, and it takes participation. How do we fix bad meetings? You know how to fix bad meetings. We've known the elements of meeting etiquette for years. We just don't apply them. One thing that's rarely done is to call meetings by different names depending on the sort of meeting. Some companies have started to use stand-up meetings. But are there common rules when to use a stand-up meeting? Are people trained in running meetings? You need to be ready before the meeting begins. You have to have agendas, estimated times, people to take notes. Less than 5% of meetings have agendas and timing and written notes. And when you're done, you have to follow up. People don't remember that they're supposed to take action until the next meeting. Someone has to remind them. Do people who come late to a meeting pay a penalty? It can be a social penalty, such as having to sing a song, or whatever makes sense at your organization and within your work culture. The leadership should expect people to read the minutes beforehand, to come prepared. And the leadership should also model this sort of behavior. Searching is another big waste category. The lean tool that's called 5S can be applied both actually in space, your actual work area, but more specifically to the virtual space. We're not going to teach that in this short talk. There's a technique to organize around what you need, called affinity analysis. You can apply this to shared space. You can redo it every 6 months just to keep things tidy. So, okay, in closing, you need to have a mental model that fits the work. If you are using a factory model in office work, it's awkward. It slows down process improvement. Number 2, measure your waste in cost terms, both for supporting strategic plans and for longevity. So if you can say that you saved $100,000 out of $1 million operation, no new boss is going to throw out the program. They're not stupid. But if you don't have dollars, it's more likely the new boss will come in and say, well, I don't like that. Let's just go off and do something else. And then when you get into the plan du jour, where all your prior work is thrown out and you never make progress. So choose your tools and approaches based on this mental model and the cost of waste. Your solution has to be prioritized on the cost of waste, and it has to be custom. You cannot take an off-the-shelf program and slap it in an office because every office has different kinds of office work. You might be in a cubicle farm, but the work changes from place to place. People can all work independently. They can be working on ad hoc teams. They can be working on permanent teams. You can have one workflow in the morning and a different workflow in the afternoon, and so on. So the solution has to be customized. You need an overall metric of waste so that you don't do random improvements that miss the critical areas. In addition, since the fraction of waste is the highest for top leadership, they need to be included as well. We have some references. If you want this talk in a PDF file, I can send it to you. Just send me an email. And speaking of email, this is my email address, doug@dcwoodconsulting.com. Once again, I'd like to thank the ASQ Quality Management Division and Lean Enterprise Division for their help. Now, to get started on this, you need management commitment. Management commitment, in turn, is based upon the dollar cost. Have you ever been to a meeting where someone is late and someone looks around and goes, "Oh, how much is this meeting costing us?" You probably have. But no one ever measures it. So you need a cost metric to get your leadership's attention. If you email me, I will provide you with a link to do a survey at your organization. I will process that data and provide you with a cost of waste for your company. This is a free offer. This will allow you to determine how much money is going down the drain. It's essentially the same survey I've used here, but it will be for your organization and the data will be compiled for your group of workers. So now that you know the cost, then you can start taking strategic steps to reduce waste. It's important that leadership actually do the leading. So we offer a workshop with these kinds of tools. If you'd like to get your free survey, email us, contact us, or to schedule a workshop. Here's another image of some of the tools we develop in our workshop. This is a value stream map designed for the office. So again, contact us and we will help you. So thank you very much for listening. I appreciate your time today, and I hope that you find that this material is useful for you and your office. Thank you very much.